Welcome to HappyTalks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amour de Soi Wellness, and Donovon Jenson is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is my awesome co-host, Donovan. And today we are talking about getting control of your life. Yes. So, Donovan, what do you think that means to you?
Yeah, so the first thing that comes to mind is sort of the distinction between actual control and perceived control, right? Because I could see how you might be in a situation where it's like, oh, I've got to get control of my life. And really what it is your thoughts have sort of ran away in a sense that it's like, oh, this thing's going on and this thing and this and this and this. And like you're sort of having like a perception or like a mental model sort of problem around control. And then I guess I could see in like a more probably dire situation, or maybe, I don't know, just more controlled in some way where it's like you legitimately don't have very much control over many of the things that you do. So the closest example that comes to mind is like as a kid, you probably genuinely have less control over a number of things. As opposed to it just being a perception problem. But anyway, that's like the first place that my mind goes, is sort of teasing out like perceptions of control problems and then actual control problems to figure out like where you can get more control of your life. But that being said, I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, when I think of getting control of your life, I think of maybe someone who just doesn't have their life together or hasn't figured out what they want out of their life, perhaps, and kind of taking the reins or taking actions to kind of figure that out, which doesn't necessarily guarantee that you'll have it figured out. It's like, I think the distinction that I want to make is that when I talk about getting control, it doesn't guarantee an outcome in any particular sense. Like for example, like right now, me and my husband are trying to get pregnant, and that's a process and it's a struggle, and there's been ups and downs to that process, and we can do the things that can improve the odds, like eating healthy, exercise, decreasing my stress, and meditating and taking certain supplements. I can do all those things, but it doesn't guarantee a specific result. But we could keep trying until it does result in something. Or similarly, like I know women who are in the process of giving birth, you know, they want their birth to go a certain way, which is nice to have those goals, but you have no idea what you're walking into or how it's going to pan out. So I think there needs to be some adaptability. And if it doesn't go perfectly to plan, then it's like adapt, but you can do your best to prepare for the best case scenario and worst case scenario. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's like you can take the actions, but it might improve your odds, but it doesn't guarantee the result.
Yeah, I think that's a really valuable lesson for people to figure out and learn, right? Because going back to sort of this like perception versus actual control sort of thing that I started on, and then melding that into what you're talking about, it's like there were long periods of my life, and I have seen this mental model copied in a lot of other people as well, where kind of like you were saying, I would get frustrated because I wasn't able to control the outcomes. And I felt like I should be able to. So like personal example for me was like getting a promotion, right? Like I felt like, oh, if I'm, you know, working super hard and I'm clearly working harder at a higher level than my peers, then like that should guarantee this outcome.
Right.
But it's just like not a realistic way of thinking, you know, and like the harder that I fought for control over things like that, the more frustrated I got, because like you said, like in a lot of scenarios, you don't necessarily control the final outcomes, but you control a lot of the levers that like change the odds of those outcomes.
Right. Yes.
So I just thought that was an important thing to highlight, that, you know, over time, as I've become better able to parse the differences, as I've become better able to go, like you were saying, like, hey, I can control my nutrition, I can control my stress levels, I can do this, that, and this.
Right.
I've actually felt more in control myself as I gain more of those levers, as opposed to in the past when I was focused on the things that are outcomes or not completely in my control.
Right.
I felt very powerless.
Yeah, definitely can relate to that for sure. I don't know about you, and I'm curious what your take is on it, but for whatever reason, when I heard this topic, getting control of your life, I just kind of had like a negative connotation in my brain. And I didn't like it. And I don't know why, because it's kind of like maybe it makes the assumption that your life is out of control and it needs to be in check. or and it's like I'm a proponent of, accepting life as how it is. It doesn't mean, stop trying and stop trying to live your best life, but maybe it's the word control, I think, is the trigger word for me. What about for you?
Yeah, I think for me, it's the piece that is hardest for me to digest is it comes layered in, kind of like, this is kind of like what you said, but like with some amount of judgment.
Yeah.
But I will also say that it does have some amount of pull or sway for me, in terms of I have personally felt there are times where my life is like out of control,
Mm-hmm.
or you may characterize it a different way, but just basically like there have been times in my life where there's so many things going on, and it's like I can't stay on top of everything. Like it feels out of control, which is again why at the beginning I sort of wanted to parse out, like,
Perceived.
in my experience, a lot of it has been like a perception issue.
Right.
But I have also had the experience that I've reacted to much more negatively, where instead of, so I'm talking about like me shining a light in on myself and my experience, and like, oh, I'd like to get more control over this stuff.
Right.
I've also seen it where it's like external or interpersonal, like, oh, you need to get control of your life. And in those circumstances, it kind of has only ever felt extremely like judgmental and not with enough space for the other person, and just with like a big basket of negative characteristics, even though the intent, right, the underlying intent may have been
Right.
positive in some way. The actual delivery of that message every time I've seen it has been very negative.
Yeah, it just kind of has this undertone of something's wrong and bad with you or your life. So maybe that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if you're telling someone else like you need to get control of your life, it's almost it's so negative, because it has an implied character judgment of like,
right,
you are unable to control yourself, like you're not strong enough to do that, whatever else, right, like that. But it's implied, and it's at a character level as opposed to at an action level. So I feel like that's why, at least for me, why it's so negative if it's external.
Yeah, definitely. I think the other part of it, where I'm kind of like, it doesn't sit well with me, is that control is, I think it's, for a lot of people, it's perceived as like an on or off. It's like you either have control or you don't have control. And growth is a messy journey of like ups and downs. And it's like, oh, so it's bad when you're out of control, or like, let's say you're trying to build a certain habit, like exercise X amount of weeks, and you fall off 1 week. And so does that mean you're out of control? Just as like, okay, no, it's a setback. Life happens, there's room for improvement. That is kind of part of life. And what can we learn from this, and how can we grow from it, versus like, you're out of control, you don't you don't have it together, you're a failure. Kind of that attitude around it.
With that sort of reaction, I'd be curious how you feel, or if it lands any differently if we change the word from control to ownership, right? Like if I was to say getting ownership of your life, like I'm curious if that lands differently.
That sits a lot better with me than control. It's just that control word for whatever reason. And maybe just my past experience gives me like a negative, like, ugh. But ownership sounds like, yeah, I'm owning my life. I'm getting ownership of my life, taking charge, but not like trying to manipulate or trying to force an outcome, I guess.
So it sounds like maybe the distinction for you is that ownership feels like a little more organic, and
Mhm.
and control feels like white knuckle, like
Yeah,
I need things to go this way.
right. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I could also see how using a word like control can make you or lead people to focus on sort of the wrong things, right? Where
Mhm.
we were talking about earlier, there's a lot of nuance around like what you actually have power over or control or ownership or whatever you want to call it, like things that you actually genuinely it's you and your choices that uh I don't know, that are the main influence there. Whereas there's other things like certain outcomes where those choices do have, yeah, like influence, but are not ultimately determined by those.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, definitely. Can you think of any examples? Like, I mean, we can use it interchangeably or whichever you prefer, but like, can you think of an example where I mean, you talked about it a little bit and you said you've experienced of like your life has been out of control. Like, was there a specific example where you felt your life was out of control and what did you do to kind of get it in control or own your life
Yeah.
at that point?
I don't know if I have a specific example, but I have enough generic like
Yeah.
pieces of the puzzle. I think we could put it together.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the times that it has felt like, things are out of control
Mm-hmm.
is in scenarios where I have too many tasks or like notifications or things. It's actually similar to what we were talking about when we talked about in the past, like being overwhelmed, I think
Yeah.
is maybe what we were talking about, or some other similar word.
Sure.
But it's sort of in that bucket, right? Where it's
Mhm.
like there are all these things coming in and I don't have enough mental space to deal with all of them. And
Mm.
so the bad version, the ineffective version of this is basically like, oh, I just got a text. Oh, here's an email. Oh, here's a ping from work. Okay. The last thing that I saw was this thing from work. I'm going to answer that. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to this next thing. Oh, now three more things came up. Now I'll just do the most recent one. And the reason that doesn't work is one, the attention switching cost is way too high, right? It's like, I'm a
Mhm.
quarter of the way done with this. New thing pops up. Oh, well, I'm going to go take care of this. And it's like all these half or quarter finished tasks, right? Like
Mhm.
it's just a mess. And that contributes to the feeling of being out of control because it's like,
Right.
oh, I can't finish any of this stuff. I haven't done anything. I haven't completed anything.
Mm.
And this can also actually work at the way I'm describing it is at like a minute by minute, hour by hour sort of level. But this also has applied to me at a longer time scale, like across weeks, where I'm still looking at like a number of projects that's so high that
Mhm.
I'm like, oh, this thing's getting away from me. I was supposed to answer this 2 weeks ago, and this thing is anyway. Back to the more compacted example. So that's the bad version, right? Is where I just keep going. Here's the most recent thing. I'm gonna
Mhm.
try to knock that out as soon as it comes up
Yeah.
because again, I'm just like scattered everywhere.
Right.
The more effective version of that, and I get caught in that first one all the time, but the more
Me
effective
too.
version is sort of a balance between triaging things as they come in and actually
Mhm.
completing tasks.
Mhm.
So one piece of that is, hey, I got a text, hey, I got an email, I got this other notification.
Mhm.
I'm going to ignore all of these until I finish the thing I was working on.
Yeah.
And another piece of it is, okay, going to look at those things and maybe like you do check them just briefly, like as far as just read them to make sure it's
Yeah.
not actually urgent,
Mhm.
but like not do anything with it. That's the biggest key for me is like once I start doing that task and then another thing pops up and I start doing that, like that's when the battle is lost. So in the more effective route, it's like, these little mini triaging sessions.
Mhm.
And then like we've talked about before, really scheduling and blocking out when things are going to happen. And with all these tasks sort of coming in, making sure that they're in priority order. Because that's another thing is like I felt out of control when I spend all day doing stuff, and then at the end of the day, there's important things that I still didn't do, and I'm
Right.
like, "What the hell? I've been working all day, and I didn't even do the two things that need to be done."
Mhm.
So that's another piece of what's important as far as feeling like things are more in control. The last thing I want to mention is sort of having some sort of system or centralized way of like, here's everything that I need to do and organize. Because another piece that really feels out of control is when it's like I have 5 notifications in 25 different things
Mhm.
and someone talking to me and whatever else, and then it's just mentally sort of spread out across the number of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I can relate to this a lot, and I'm guilty of being distracted by all the pings and the messages that we get. And yeah, I had to also learn to sometimes just not respond. And because especially if I'm like in the middle of something and someone texts me, I'm like, I can't even read it because then I'll forget to respond because I'm doing something else. So then that's a whole situation in itself. And yeah, that I could see that being more like, yeah, getting a hold of your life. Yeah, maybe I like that word better, getting a hold of your life instead of getting control of your life. Because time management, which is something we have talked about a few times on this podcast, is like so critical, and that helps me feel like I'm getting things done, I'm accomplishing things, and I'm setting up like focusing on like what are the priorities. Yeah, I have had the same experience where I feel like I've been busy all day, go go go, and then at the end of the day I'm like, did I really do anything, or didn't get anything important done? It's just all these menial things that weren't really super important but just simpler to do. And so like time blocking or just setting aside the time, and then also setting aside time to do those littler things like get back to people, emails or texts or messages and things like that, that having a blocked out set time for that, once you've accomplished the bigger things. And I've probably talked about this before of, like, I mean, I'm so guilty. I'm like, oh, I have various to-do lists, like high priority, medium, low priority. And I try to like just pick like 2 or 3 things for the day to focus on, but I always like my list keeps expanding all the time, and I'm like, no, just focus on 1 or 2 things and that'll feel like an accomplishment. But that's a practice in itself of trying to like isolate it down to smaller so it feels more, because then it's like, oh yeah.
Oh yeah, no, that's another great point that you bring up about making things smaller, because I've also felt a lot more out of control when I have a bunch of tasks that are
Yeah.
huge,
Yeah.
right? Or just unknown, right? So I think we were talking about it before, like, my brand new, well, it's not brand new, new to me, wood stove is like
Yeah.
all rusted up and seemingly happened overnight. And when it first happened, I got stuck in this trap of just like, oh no, I have to drop everything and fix this right now. Like oh, this is like critical. But over the past, day or so, it's been like, as I've had a little more time to think about it, and I spent a ton of time already sort of like researching it and trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do, I realized like, oh, this is not crazy urgent. Like, it's something I would like to take care of, but it's not more important than say like going to work, like focusing on my job and things like that. And
Right.
like a wiser approach would have been maybe time blocking, because it was unknown, an amount of time, like, okay, I'm going to spend 20 minutes on this and figure out if it's urgent. I'm not going to go down a rabbit hole of like, what's the best way to fix this? How can I get the optimal solution? Oh, what are all the different products? Because that's what I actually did. But like a more useful thing would have been to sort of block out like, okay, I'm going to spend just enough time to figure out how urgent this is. And I'm not feeling, out of control, or however we want to characterize it today. However, those are the kinds of things that when paired with, okay, let's say I have this surprise rust problem, and then I have this a surprise car problem, and then something with the gutters, and there's like a minor flood or something, like that's when I can start to really feel out of control, is when it's like there's all these problems cropping up, and I don't have necessarily solutions for them, and I feel like I have to solve everyone right now.
Right.
So mainly all that's to say, sometimes too, it's easy to get sucked into sort of this trap of like, this has to get done right now because the problem just popped up. But if you can just take a minute to, again, going back to like that diagnostic part, Sometimes it is like, oh, this might be urgent. I need to figure it out.
Yeah.
And then go back to what you were doing.
Right. Yeah, it's not a perfect system. You just have to kind of, life will keep happening. And I think that's also another point to drive home, is that, life will happen and we have to adapt, and things don't always go as planned, but keep doing your best. Like one of the 4 agreements. And that's the other thing I wanted to touch on when people feel like their life is out of control, is to not necessarily bundle it with like, oh, I suck, or I'm bad, or I'm wrong, or all of that. Like, have a certain perception of yourself because it feels like life isn't going exactly as planned, or you don't have it figured out yet. But instead of seeing it that way, as just like, okay, well, what do I need to do to be a little more effective in a certain area? Or if there's too many things going on, it's like, let's just focus on one thing to be a little more effective on. Like, because sometimes when I'm trying to I've learned the lesson of not trying to start like 5 new habits in the same month. It's like, let's add 1 new habit for the month and see how that goes. Because if I try 5 and then I'm failing at 5, that just doesn't seem as effective. And then you just kind of quit. So I think it's a matter of, okay, it's nothing wrong, nothing's bad. It's just a matter of like, where can I grow, or what do I need to do to be more effective at this particular thing for this moment in time?
Yeah, I think that's a really helpful way of just sort of chunking things out so that they're a little bit more digestible.
Yeah.
We've been talking a lot about sort of this dichotomy between out of control and in your control, right?
Yeah.
And I just thought of a different angle. I'd be curious what your thoughts are. If somebody feels like not so much that their life is out of control, but more that they don't have control in their own life. So let me give you some examples. Kids, right? That's an easy one. Like if they feel like their parents are too oppressive or whatever, or telling them every single thing they have to do. And then also probably the other most common one would be like spouses or relationships, where they feel like their significant other is like, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do this. And like it starts feeling like, I don't have control over any of my time, or like a sufficient amount of my time feels controlled by someone else. I'm sure there are some other scenarios, but those are the top 2 that come to mind, and I'll just be curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I mean, my initial thought is that, 1, nobody likes the feeling of someone trying to control them. It's just like someone was kind of like our guests we had, Laura, who was talking about like, oh yeah, if you want your spouse to do a certain thing, it's like nagging, and it's not gonna, or trying to like manipulate or control is not really the effective way of getting them to do the thing that you want them to do. But being more like inspiring and uplifting and motivating is a little more effective typically. Yeah, I guess for me it's a little hard, because I'm like, if it felt like someone was trying to control them, I would push back. I don't think, even if it was something I could very capably do, or even if it was a good thing to do for myself or my life, that there's some sort of resistance when there's like control. So I'd say, like, if you're the person trying to get someone to do something, coming from the angle of control usually doesn't work. And actually that just reminds me of some parenting advice I had heard from a podcast recently, was like, what's more important if you have kids and you're trying to control them, it's not like having the relationship is more important than trying to control your kids, because it's the same thing. Nobody likes to be controlled. So that's where my brain initially goes. And maybe it's all because I don't like the word control.
Yeah. Well, I have a follow-up for you, which is,
okay.
Is there, or has there been a time when you were a kid, probably, that you felt like your parents were like trying to control you, right? And then, regardless of like how true the perception was, right? But like it felt that way.
Yeah.
I'd be curious either what helped you through that or what you now would have liked to have known that would have helped you.
That would have, man, everything that my parents pushed on me, I resisted. Just like, especially when they would try to like coach or teach me themselves. Like, I took piano lessons for 3 years and I hated it because I had a piano teacher, but my mom tried to teach me on the side outside of my lessons. And that just made me hate it. And now as an adult looking back, and I'm thinking, man, it'd be really nice if I knew how to play piano. Really great skill. Same thing with learning Chinese. I pushed back, I resisted, and now I'm like, man, that would be great to be bilingual. A nice thing to have. But it was like the rebellious kid in me of like feeling like I was being controlled. So but I think if I were to step back and if I were to talk to my 10-year-old self that was fighting everything that was trying to be, when her perception was getting pushed on her, to be like, keep an open mind. Your parents just want what's best for you, and try it out. And if you could drop this idea that it's getting pushed on you, do you actually enjoy it? Do you like it? Do you feel like you're getting something out of it? If you can set aside this like perceived idea that someone's controlling you or pushing you to do it. And then who knows, maybe I would have stuck with it longer. But it was like, I don't feel like I gave myself the chance to know if it was something I really wanted to do or if it was just something I resisted simply because of it being pushed on me. Who knows?
Yeah, I think that's a good strategy or a good technique to try, right? Is to see if independently you would be interested in doing whatever the thing is, right? Like, what's your actual experience with a thing outside of the relationship where it feels like someone is pushing you to do something specific?
Right.
Because I know I've had the same experience. In fact, I used to hate soccer because my mom forced me to play on teams. And then once I was able to tap more into like what's my experience as opposed to like what's my relationship to sort of the situation, I realized like, oh no, I actually do like it. Like this actually is enjoyable. But I pushed against it hard as well. But yeah, no, I think that's a useful sort of idea to employ to at least get more clarity on what you're pushing against.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like if my parents just like let me, I mean, I get it though. It's like a kid might want to just quit right away before they even really get to know if it's something that they enjoy or like. And you have to go through that awkward learning phase, which is never enjoyable for anyone to endure it. But it's like, okay, maybe if they told me like, okay, you just have to try this for 2 or 3 months. And if you still don't like it at that time, you can quit, versus being like, do it. And it's like, you have no choice. And then feeling like when you actually want to quit, then you're disappointing them. It would have been a different experience. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that's another good piece of information, which is like, from what I've seen, a lot of times the things that feel controlling are also a result of weaker communication, right? Where it's like you said, like it's not really a back and forth to agree on a path forward. It's more of just like a, you do this.
Right.
And I'm sure some high percentage of the blame is at the feet of whoever is trying to do the controlling. But speaking of things under your influence or under your power, trying to open up more of a conversation,
right,
to see if there's something a little bit more mutually agreeable is likely. I mean, it's more likely than blindly following or like pushing against it, right? To give you an optimal solution. So even though it may not be fair, what is, if you are able to start sort of asking questions or offering alternatives or figuring things out, that could help a lot, because I based on like what you just said, it just reminded me that a lot of the times, if I had thought a little bit more or had a little bit more of an understanding of why the other person was trying to control me in that way,
Mm-hmm.
I would have had more space to either accept it or negotiate it. I almost said argue, but negotiate's a better word.
Mm.
Um, because sometimes, like you said, it's like, with a parent-child relationship, there generally people are only forcing their kids to do stuff because they think that it will be beneficial for them in some way.
Right.
But I don't think it's communicated that often around like,
I don't think kids get that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
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 Or it's just like, the communication is at a level that's not helpful for the age group, right? Because I remember times where we were like, this is going to be good for you, or oh my god, if anyone ever tells me it builds character ever again in my life, I'm gonna freak out. Like, because it didn't mean anything to me, right? Like,
Right.
it's like,
Yeah.
why do I have to do this thing that I don't want to do? Oh, because it builds character. Well, like, that isn't
Mhm.
really, I mean, now I can sort of smash that into a box, but at the time it didn't mean anything to me.
Right. Yeah.
But if somebody could have explained some of those things in a better way, it
Yeah.
might have helped me to understand, like, sometimes you have to do unpleasant things
Mhm. Yeah.
regardless of how you feel.
Right.
And by doing that, you'll be better able to handle other things that you don't want to necessarily do,
Mhm.
but have to. And
Right.
that's part of the nature of the way that life works. Like,
Yeah.
some more context
Yeah.
on some of those things might have been helpful. Maybe not. Maybe I wasn't developed enough
No,
to take it in any form. But I can
yeah.
tell you that the packaging, right, the communication,
Mhm.
the depth was just not there in the vast majority of interactions that I was feeling controlled or wanted to push back against.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. But I would feel like I would probably respond better if someone said something like what you said, of just like, yeah, understanding that life isn't always sunshine and rainbows and you don't get to play and have fun with your friends all the time. It's like you also have responsibilities. But the other thing I thought of, just in terms of like the parenting context of, giving the kid some choices, maybe it's like they can achieve the same goal. Like, there's different sports. It's like maybe soccer isn't the sport that they want to do. Maybe it's like swimming or something else. It's like, okay, well, if you want them to build character or have something to keep them active and physical, then, give them a few options and let them choose. It reminds me of like when COVID was happening and my sister had to do the homeschooling with her kids during the COVID Zoom classes and all of that. To some extent, she heard from another parent friend of giving her kids, who were pretty young, like under 5, I think at that time, giving them some autonomy, like get them more excited to do those things versus being told to do it. So she had them like create a list of things that you're going to accomplish today, and just you get a check mark when you do the thing. But they created the list themselves. Well, they worked with my sister, their mother, to create the list too. It's not just like eating candy all day, but like getting like certain things done. Check. And so they would earn like a sticker or something at the end of the day if they got all their little tasks done. And that felt good, because it's like they got to be a part of the process of deciding what they would be doing. And therefore they were just more excited to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like it's it not only feels better, but it helps build some more sort of autonomy and resilience in terms of like, oh, I do have the ability to like choose some things. Like you said,
Mhm.
with that buy-in, you're also more likely to get them to actually do the thing that
Right.
they've committed to. And
Yeah.
I was thinking, as you were talking about sort of the kids relationship, I feel like it's similar in other relationships, not quite the same, right? It's not quite like
We
that,
work the
but
same sometimes.
I'm thinking in terms of like, okay, let's say hypothetically I have a bunch of chores or house chores or
Mhm.
whatever, and I need help. If I ask my partner, or if I tell my partner, hey, you need to do this, it's going to feel much worse than saying like, hey, there's 4 or 5 things that I'm trying to get done. Is there any of them that you would be willing to help with?
Yeah.
And if they can pick from a list of things or have more autonomy, then it's less likely to be something that it's like, I guess I just got told to do this, so I guess I'll do it. But like,
Right.
it sucks, as opposed to like, oh, I chose to help with this thing, and that seems nice to me. Like, I chose to do this.
Yeah.
So, specific situations will vary, but when that is an option, I feel like it's one that I would prefer. If that was offered to me
Yeah,
instead, like, hey,
totally.
could you help me with one of these things? That would really make my day better, as opposed to like, go do this.
Right. Yeah, I would be way more responsive and likely to do it if it came off that way. All right, well, I think we covered this topic pretty well. Is there any other final points you wanted to make before we wrap?
The main thing is just that, in my experience at least, and from the people I've seen around me, a lot of times, if you feel like you don't have control or ownership, or however you want to characterize it, it's often a perception issue, because we generally do have quite a bit of control over our lives, regardless of the situations. Now, there may be, depending on your situation, more or less controls in certain areas, right? Certain very specific things. But even within that, usually we still have the ability to make some choices and have some influence on how things go. So focusing there, like we talked about, is far more likely to be fruitful than just sort of railing against outcomes that you don't control, or whatever else it is.
Yeah, totally agree. Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in this week. We appreciate you. And if you appreciate us, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and help spread the happiness in the world. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it and then go and subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so you get notified when the next video comes out. If you check out in the description below, go to my website where you can get my free fast and easy guide to stress relief. Thanks again for checking us out, and we'll see you next time.